Okay, so we'll see how this goes. We are all involved, recognizing microscopic in green city policy. So I'll talk just a point about the spatial efficiency of nature play. We'll look at a bunch of different kinds of examples that come from thoughtful design thinking in the urban context. So this is all about green in the city and the idea of green infrastructure, but related to children. And then is that reflected at all in current urban policy? Will be the closing thought. So I don't know if anybody knows this movie, but this came to England when I was a young adult. And if you know the storyline, Jim is competing for a girl's attention at high school. And he gets challenged to play chicky by his rival. And his rival ends up getting hooked on the car and goes over the cliff and gets killed. And Jim comes home and he's telling his mother that he's going to spill the beans down at the police station. And his very domineering mother says, "Why do you need to do that? You're not involved. You were not involved in this." And this unforgettable line from, he's such an incredible actor. If you watch this movie, you just see this way he moves and expresses these emotions. And he says, "I am involved. We are all involved." And his spineless father gets into the argument. This is on the stairs. Anyway, so that line has stuck with me. So we are all involved in greening the city, is the point here. And I was just thinking of all the different types of people that are involved. There's landscape designers, but also transportation engineers from how streets are, educators, of course, and then artists, environmental artists, people that can put this creative touch on things. And then different kinds of users, parents, of course, homeschoolers, and other kinds of professions, Parks and Rec, city staff and elected officials, and of course, children and youth themselves, and there must be more. So it's not just designers. We all need to be mindful of what needs to be done to make the city into this green space. Just a beginning point, I know some of the folks in the room are well aware of children's rights and the convention, the United Nations Convention, which says in child's language, I have a right to a decent environment, and a bunch of other things besides, which we were going to, but including a right to play, Article 31. So if you don't know the convention, this is like the authoritative upper-level international view of children, and you'll find it on the UNICEF website. So what's the problem? Well, we've heard a lot about the problem in relation to kids. Kids are not moving enough, they're not eating healthy, they don't know where food comes from, and a bunch of other things that then affect their development, right? We've heard a lot about that, all these different consequences of these lifestyle issues that can essentially be fixed. They're not communicable diseases, but they become diseases that are very, very serious. We've heard a lot about that. But what's the problem also for the planet, right? Lack of understanding of human dependency on the biosphere, lack of care for the biosphere, this thin web of life that we all depend on as human beings, and then this lack of political courage to take action, meaning our political leaders, but also our voters, understanding this. And the consequences of this lack of care or understanding, global climate change, obvious, urbanization, uncontrolled urbanization, pollution, and especially the elements of the biosphere that we have absolute dependency on: water, soil, plants, animals, and of course more. But so just a part of the solution, okay, there's this big, huge problem that we're facing as a global community is, as we know, getting kids outdoors from year zero. We say start at year zero. So we've, and I talk about this Children and Nature strategy. We're currently engaged in a project with the National League of Cities, which has prompted this presentation today, because we're trying to figure it out. It's not easy, and there has not been much progress on this thus far. But to engage children in the places where they live their everyday lives from birth until 18 years old, and to create spaces in the city that literally pull kids outdoors. They're so entertaining, they're so compelling, they're so interesting that they will not think of staying indoors. They've got to get out. So we currently just started a project in Philadelphia at a very well-known park, Fairmount Park, which is bisected by the river, and we're on the east side of the park, adjacent to a reservoir. And that's introduced us, I'm an urban planner by background, into a kind of historical reality of Philadelphia, which was a designed city. And another project that has been done by the landscape architect that we're working with in Philadelphia, Brian Haynes, and his studio. So this is both ends of a historical corridor along the river, which connects through the Benjamin Franklin Parkway that was designed by a French landscape architect back in 1917. Very classical, axial, but this ceremonial street that connects up a lot of the cultural institutions in Philadelphia. So context is important, right? It's often like, oh, can we do this here? Can we not do that there? And some of the officials are going to say, well, kids play, that's not for here. That doesn't belong, with the museums or what have you. So we're looking down this strong axis towards City Hall. And there's Logan Square, which is partway along this historical landscape that has become an anachronism, doesn't work that well now. It's got a highway, very busy highway on one side, and then Sister City Park, which is right in this quadrant here, is where we're looking at. So within that area, there's this little space here that was designed just a few years ago by Brian Haynes, really small. This is, by our calculation, 0.15 in an acre. It's a little micro space right in the heart of the city. So the proof of concept here. You can do this. It's this little tiny space. Here's a sketch. You can see immediately the complexity of the design, this pathway wandering around, intersecting with some water flow that we'll see in a moment. And it's right next to a cafe and plaza, a place where parents can hang out and have fun knowing that their children are within this fenced-in area, right? Dangerous streets alongside, bike access for older kids and families, very green environment, very well coordinated, great example of city decision makers having a collective vision of bringing all the pieces together in one place. So this is what it looks like looking back towards the visitor center. Do we have the lights correctly? Yeah, I guess we can see that, okay. And so you see this little pool here, and then there's a stream flowing down. The whole thing is recirculating. It's, wow, they can do that in Philadelphia, and it works. And you don't need much water to do this kind of thing. Very young children. And the parents hanging out. They're having fun. Everybody's in this meeting place in the city. And very well designed landscape with, as you see, we saw the section a couple of slides back, third dimension here in a very small space, terracing with rocks, with a winding path going up. Maybe there could be a fence line here to stop kids just running through the ground cover, but okay, never mind. And the stream, typical stream behavior, you don't have to say anything, right, in a little space like this. parents also enjoying it with very young children. So, these young children are learning to deal with this kind of environment, as Anita was talking about, as we would say, learning the affordances and building that skill set as they become older to get into larger adventures. So this is where it needs to start, in these small-scale adventures for 3-year-olds. Very good. Another great example is in Brooklyn Bridge Park, New York City. We worked with Michael Van Valkenburg on this project. If you haven't seen it, it's a very impressive playscape. And at one end, there's this beautiful little, this is minute on the ground. It looks like this this is black locust on the ground that is just saying, come and follow me into this little tiny micro woodland in the heart of the city that's just a little piece of a much more active play environment. But here it's very tranquil, de-stressing. Kids can just gather back there and have a great time and relax. I have to thank Sarah Conradi, a colleague in the natural learning environment, for this example from Cologne. The green star marks the spot which I have labeled Lavender Steps. So there's this grand flight of granite steps going down to the river. And this is pure design thinking, because whoever was in charge of this project, well, we have this grand idea of steps, but we don't have to make it all hard. Let's take out some of the treads and replace it with planting, in this case, lavender. So you can imagine when the lavender is out, there's this lavender fragrance flowing across the flight of steps for everybody to enjoy. It's just a very simple thing, but it requires that imagination to get that to happen. And then at the foot of the steps, another water play. So water play and the design of water play environments is quite challenging, and there's all kinds of barriers to get over, mostly health and safety. And so we now have this collection from around the world. And again, this is the kind of space, a little bit bigger than the Philadelphia one, excuse me, where it's a community gathering ground as well as being a place for kids to get wet and mess around in the water. So it's a comfortable place for parents to hang out. There's nice seating, as in this case in Portland. So this is too often, I would say, thought about just from the point of view of kids and not as an intergenerational kind of environment where all ages can hang out in this spot and kids are doing their own thing at the same time. Again, involving water, but big chunks of rock too. So jumping to Angers, or as it was said on our GPS, Angers, is a wonderful city in the Loire Valley, and it has a big kind of empty, hard plaza, as you can see in the photograph here, surrounded by some cafes. They do the most amazing thing here in the summer. Oh, by the way, the light rail passes right through the center of town here in the plaza. How intelligent is that? So this is just a great example of ephemeral installation during the summertime. Artificial lawn, deck chairs, shade, relax during the lunchtime or whatever. And then all this funky artwork, which, so, I don't even know how to describe this, but, someone in the city has this brilliant notion, and there's a community of folks that do this kind of thing, and they manage to put it together and just have a great time and offering, this wonderful, strange, exploratory environment, which obviously is attractive and intriguing to everybody. And you can get into it, and kids can explore it, and so forth. Just down the river, the city of Nantes, and I couldn't resist this because here we are. Darn it. Anyway, behind the photograph here is Patrick Doherty. So our wonderful North Carolina artist And inside this great structure, probably some of these all over the world now, kids are just having a great time chasing each other and getting this physical activity and enjoying the space. So the point here is, how can you recreate that kind of spatial relationship or interaction, not necessarily a Patrick Doherty temporary installation, but something maybe more substantial. Or here, hard plaza, bamboo is kind of tricky to work with, but if you have it surrounded by a concrete pavement, you're good. It's not going to it's not going to invade. So every plant in its own place. And obviously this is a wonderful kind of chase, go hide and go seek, same kind of aspect. It's intriguing, it's adventurous, and it's bamboo, which is this very fascinating plant to kids. Great to work with. Or something a little more grandiose, but the same idea of supporting plants and vines with armatures of different shapes and sizes. And you just need the imagination here to create these kinds of spaces that are intriguing and wonderful for everybody. Or the idea of an incidental garden, this one in St. Paul, which was sponsored by the business next door, but just offers this little respite. And they're caring for it. It's not a public park. It's just adding some attractive enhancement to the streetscape as you move through the center of town. Well, here we are in London, off of one of the streets in East London, just a little pathway that comes off the street through vegetation into a little tiny space that's embedded in the housing. In fact, in this case, in the middle of the day, I don't know if you can see back there, but there's a group of adults taking time off to have their lunch from an adjacent office. There's a piece of play equipment there, so okay, it's a place for kids, but look at all of the green stuff that's happening there too. Very small. So green streets, where everybody spends time, and we should be spending more time as pedestrians. How can we make those streets more attractive to everybody? There's so many different ways of doing this, and we're all involved. This is not just landscape architects, it's horticultural specialists, knowing about the plants, the artists that give a little touch to things, the original design, as you see in the top left there, the elevated terraces in the housing area just off the street, the huge pots. Pots are great, and some cultures use pots very commonly for planting. Cambridge, just on a main street in Cambridge, and there's this little detour on the sidewalk that goes through a green environment. And there's enough pathway there, you can imagine kids just chasing around, in and out, around, just a little incident that adds some greenness to their life, right? And a bit of color there too. And notice one of our favorite topics. This is absolutely essential. See that? What we call plant protector rails of many different types, but you've got to have that. Back in France, new development in a city that seems to really think about street design from a new point of view. So on this photograph, there's a cycleway, and then this broad, perennially planted street trees, and then the sidewalk looks like this. So flowering, a lot of focus here on bulbs, daylilies, I think. And so there's a street here, heavily trafficked street, and then this raised table at the pedestrian crossing. So the cars slow down and the pedestrians stay on the same level. Bikes are here, pedestrians are here. And the whole thing, this only was installed, 2 years ago, is going to be wonderful. What you can do with a curb line. So the curb lines always have to be straight. If you mess around with them a bit, and there's many different examples of doing this, then the cars are going to slow down and you have an opportunity for greening the streetscape again. Or just very small things, very hardy plants that won't let go and are going to grow just out of a little tiny crack in the sidewalk up against the building. That kind of thing. Just the plant is proving something, right? I am resilient. I can do this. So just give me a helping hand. So the notion of green infrastructure, which has been around for several years now, is the sense of this network of green in the city, oftentimes following drainage channels. So the idea is to link it up into a whole system from the point of view of animal life and continuity of the ecosystem. It sometimes is translated as kind of engineering works, as you see in the bottom right there, but it's really not that. It's a much bigger idea. And it's being attended to a great deal more, I would say, in Europe than here in the United States. So we're making progress here, but we have a long way to go. The thing that's missing, I find, is a sense of the way in which these developments, the green infrastructure, could connect to children's interests and play. So that's part of the theme here. But on a technical level, there's some wonderful things being done across the country. A lot of this is on the West Coast, but here's what I would like to call BioStreet. So it's taking the stormwater runoff and helping it get back into the ground through permeable landscapes, replenishing the aquifers, and keeping that cycle going. So it's all about this idea of sustainability from the point of view of water conservation and water care. But where can we get the kids in on this? How can we make this also have play value and relevance to the kids that live on the street? Don't see too many examples of that yet. This is all like technical, and it's great. It's sort of an engineering project or a bioengineering project, and it's spreading to parking lots slowly. But there are some good examples of this, and they tend to show up in places like botanical gardens and museums. So, like we see here in Chicago. And so there's an interpretive board, maybe that's good in this kind of context, helping the user understand what's going on here. There's the way it used to be and now the way it is, and this is what we're trying to do with these kinds of installations. Streets are always, the competition is always between cars and people, right? And the problem here in the US is we still have too many big cars. If you go to Europe, if you have a small car, you're allowed to tuck it in between the trees. This is very innovative. You see this a little bit. So the trees are actually out in the street, shading the cars, and there's kind of, as you see here, a kind of corridor of parking spots. But if your car's too big, you're not going to be allowed in there. And we've got to protect the trees, which is also done. So this all works. It's on the ground and it works. And it's a great model. And so if we think of this greening from the street into the parking area and think of it from a more social point of view too, this is also a French example. So here there's this planting in between the parking spots, and did we see that? Never mind. There's actually a place where you can walk. There's actually a pedestrian environment within the parking lot. Sorry, I must have cut that slide out. But okay, balancing on the curb line. Yes. So the ultimate social intervention, design intervention here. And so we begin to have an idea about mixing these different things together. So the big picture, as I already intimated, is biorestoration in the city. And I still would say there's not enough attention to really understanding how to get children to learn from what's going on here. This some magnificent examples now across the country. That used to be a mall, top left hand, went out of business, destroyed. They had put their creek underground. Now they brought it to the surface again and developed the housing. So it's mixed use development, higher density housing, and this wonderful treatment of the creek, which is part of a much larger project in Seattle. I think it's 16 miles of Thornton Creek that's being restored. But when I look at the photographs of this, I couldn't see how kids would actually get into here. It's kind of fenced off. It's it's sort of very precious, and we need to rethink some of that. You can look at it, but you can't really get down into it. So that's one of our concerns. So why not think about greening up the public toilets, putting them in place? So if we start to put these different pieces together, we can have an idea about what we might call a permeable green neighborhood, where it's brought into the housing area itself, as we just saw in the restoration. This is in Sydney, by the way. England examples. So this was a planned community decades and decades ago, where the streets are very narrow. There's no sidewalks right on the street, but there's, again, the separation between the street and a green strip and a kind of narrow pathway that goes in front of the front yards, which obviously is a very attractive space for children. The traffic is very low. They have many roundabouts and ways of controlling the traffic. So can we make streets that are strollable, easy, always green, separated from traffic? Notice the separator here, that's like maybe 3 feet wide. You don't see that in every city. You don't see it in Raleigh, that's for sure. They concrete over spaces like that. They fill them with brick. You may have noticed. It's really irritating. and you go to other places and demonstrate, no, you don't have to do that. You can make it green, low maintenance, easily managed annual plants. And then my favorite topic, dead-end streets. Well, from the kids' point of view, there's nothing dead about it at all. This is right here in Raleigh, small enclave, close to downtown, actually. A bunch of families live there. Kids have grown up. They've learned to ride bikes, and it doesn't take much to have fun. So they're riding up the bank beside the street there, on the dead-end street, and just around behind the shrub and down again. Remember that from your childhood? Round and round and round on a bike, endlessly. Doesn't take much. So greening streets, Boulder, Colorado, fantastic. Just no mown grass, just fill it with plants, and then you're going to reduce the cost, I'm sure, because keeping that grass up to speed costs many dollars each year. So basic elements, right? So as we think about these neighborhoods and street landscapes and vegetation and making it a happy place for kids, wow, you don't need much, but there is some technical aspects here about the plant choice, the spacing between the plants, the context of the plants, and the specific location in that context. Or this kind of thing, a little more elaborate, but think of cave-like spaces for children that may be in many different kinds of places, or just the loose parts, basic elements that nature gives us a free supply, and we can do whatever we like with them, as long as the space is provided. And it's managed, and I'll come back to that in a moment, managed from a kid's point of view. Bamboo again. And so just creative use of this kind of materials, little pathways, rock, rough and ready. But in fact, this landscape was created by an artist working with, obviously in collaboration with horticultural folks. So it's a constructed landscape, but the style is totally different to a manicured park or an equipment playground, or it's just a kind of exploratory space that doesn't require any high-level maintenance because it's grown up and people have come to accept this kind of approach to landscape design and management, or exotic plants like this one. Pathways through, the light shining through, plant choice, passion flower, and what it does. Very exotic flowers, produces fruit, just hanging on a vertical space there. And this is back in the same park. And so there's higgledy-piggledy I guess that's a British phrase, rocks. Woo! So this is what, again, Anita was talking about. So, you don't want it smooth and easy to navigate. You want it where the child has to learn balance and pay attention to what they're doing as they move through. And in the same place, they can go and cool off on a very simple water spray that's hooked up there. So this kind of rocky, shrubby, rough and ready landscape created by an artist. And notice the age of these kids, right? So somehow this has an adventuresome quality to it that's going to attract kids beyond 6 years old, which is often what you see when the landscape is dumbed down. And what do you know? Photo op. So I followed these kids around. See, they're getting up there, pre-teens. And they're just chasing around, having fun, just exploring what's going on, right? Embedded in the residential area. And after a little bit of that, they're just, what teens do. Sit down, nattering to each other, sharing different things together. Okay, flower bed seesaw. This is in a rather fancy garden exhibit, but this is a brilliant design, so we hope the video...
Laissez-moi. Laissez-moi. Laissez-moi.
So the plants were surviving, right? Isn't that amazing? Because the attractive thing is a seesaw. And it's beautifully designed with that central deck and then off and on the seesaw. And so this is all about how to manage that kind of environment. And what we say is mainly an incremental kind of development. And somehow you've got to, from a design point of view, balance the impact of kids on the landscape and the landscape on the kids. So how do you make that balance? And it is a management task. It's way beyond just maintaining. So I just love that French example. And I couldn't help showing this one of a very modestly managed landscape because there's someone in the audience from the bad typo there, Rivers, Five Rivers, Five Fivers, that's interesting. Metro Parks, where are you? Yes, thank you. So this is brilliant. So this is a historic park just outside of Dayton, Hills and Dales. Long history, won't go into it. But the key thing here is bathrooms and parking on the left-hand side there. And a very nice, regular kind of playground with play equipment, but a lot of planting. And also notice the benches or the comfortable seats where adults can hang out. And then in this beyond, it's basically a remnant woodland in the neighborhood, which the Five Rivers Metro Park system took over and just drove a few trails. This is very small, couple of acres. Wood chips, prepare these sections of branch and lumber, and you can just see off the photograph here, there's some spyglasses and trowels for kids to dig with. Nothing much more. And again, and this is a kind of a drainage ditch that runs through. Look at the age of these kids again, enjoying the mud. And it's used by the local elementary school too during the week. So it's this multi-use space in the neighborhood, very, very modest. Costs $500 according to the park system. And then the day I was there was a gathering with parents later on in the afternoon, just hanging out with each other, and they're getting used to what's going on there. Great. So just to end up, just a couple of words about policy. Some of the work on green cities, so there's kind of a movement about green cities going on that's based on, again, going back to the sort of international level, the United Nations Environment Program, 2005, the Urban Environmental Accords. So over the many decades now, been more and more focused on cities because that's where most people live. And urban nature, 3 action steps. And it doesn't mention kids here, and it talks about a park being within half a kilometer of every city resident, but half a kilometer is a long space for kids. Did I say that? Yeah? Yes. 4.5 NFL football fields. So that's a little far away. So if you look at some of the literature that's out there and the reports that are fairly recent in this field, OECD, that's a very formidable organization, international organization, based in Paris but covers across the globe. Their recent report, Cities and Green Growth, it's wonderful to be able to search these PDFs for the word child. So the word child in this document occurs twice, and it's in the reference to Rich Liu's book. It's just amazing. It's still a completely blind spot. Green City Index. This is not actually much about green as we would understand it, biological green, plants and that kind of thing. It's mainly about transportation and all other kinds of systems in the city, but not the actual green system. It's interesting. It's powerful stuff. It's the Economist Intelligence Unit in London. It's really good data across many, many cities. Vancouver, Canada, has a young child on the seashore on the front cover, and here's some adolescents with their hands in the dirt helping to make it happen, but very, very little discussion of kids actually in the document. This is the sole comment, access to nature. Okay, great, thank you. These spaces also contribute to our sense of community by creating places for recreational activities for children, play, for neighbors to meet and socialize. Okay, good stuff, but hardly focusing on the incredible importance of all this for children. It's very frustrating. So, deals with all these other topics. You would want a goal that specifically relates to children in a document like this. I just happened to find this really great paper that demonstrates across a broad range of different sites that were studied, showing how this whole issue of green is an environmental justice issue. Wherever the people are poorer, there's less green. So just to finish up here, what's the next old, big, new thing? So, okay, we know about the new Education Act last year to ensure opportunity for all American students. Hopefully it's going to make changes, and it is tied to the environmental literacy plans that every state has developed or is in the process of developing. So, going back to the formal school system, we've been around in that area for many, many decades. Right here in North Carolina, some years ago, in Southern Pines, showing how you can intervene in a terrible, horrible elementary scape. But this was driven by parents who were able to get a lot of different action in the community to make this happen. A very successful project, but we struggle a lot in the public schools. Independent schools is another whole story, and Montessori, they're way ahead of most. But this was a very successful project, demonstrates, you build it and they will come, in this case, the state ranger talking about the red-cockaded woodpecker and so forth. And so last week, the Children in Nature Network released their Green Schoolyards report, which is a very solid piece of work. I would recommend it to you. I'm sure it's on their website by now, across many cities across the United States, showing all of these different relationships. So they did a really good job that shows how green schoolyards can have links to all these different aspects of development and community. They've got some great infographics there, which probably are, I think, available on their website. They've done a great job getting together the existing scientific research, packaging it in a communicative way, as we heard from Glenn yesterday, dealing with fitness and stress and, of course, education, and just the importance of getting kids, getting this kind of landscape into the school environment. So it is part of the everyday environment of children. And look at the middle thing there, talking about the importance of design, community engagement, and school support. Three basic components for success. So thank you for your attention. This is our favorite patch of bamboo in Southern Pines, where a bunch of us did a beautiful program with kids taking risks in the bamboo. So thanks very much.